This is the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles.
Before we get started, a couple of things I want to remind you about. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. And speaking of Prize Picks, August 17th, this Saturday night, UFC 305, Israel Adesanya's free square will activate, where if Israel Adesanya gets at least one significant strike, that square will win. So take a look at that. Also, take the guesswork out of buying baseball or even football tickets with the season rapidly approaching with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Let's talk joint practice against the Philadelphia Eagles from yesterday, Greg. Saw your appearance on Felger and Maz. Boy, you were a happy fella. But before we get to that, let's get to actually the good stuff. You want to start with the good stuff, and the good stuff was the defense yesterday. I'll just paint the picture here for people. Greg and I ended up in the same area in the perch. I've been to 4 padded practices in the joint practice, so I've been there 5 times during this camp season, and I've made sure that I'm in the perch. So I was in the perch, which is red level, kind of near 98.5, the Patriots.com guys. I like sitting there to see, like, everything, right, to be above the field. Greg had a separate perch when he goes to training camp. It's really the Greg Bedard perch. He's the only person there. He is tucked away from everybody else being antisocial. And he was incapable of having his perch yesterday because fans were there. So Greg then
huge crowd.
Huge crowd. I think I saw 11,000 plus people there yesterday. And so Greg found it worthwhile and meaningful to intrude in my space and decided to join me in my perch. I also noticed that as the practice went on, Greg got further and further away from me. I don't know if that was a personal or professional statement, but I thought by the time the practice was over, Greg might be in the parking lot while I was still in the perch. So that's where we're at. We're watching. And I am not a brand amongst myself. Well, I kind of am, right? I'm the only person. I'm just watching the offense. The offense is in front of us. The defense was on the field further away from Greg and I, where most of the fans were, where the stands are. And so Mike Giardi was watching the defense while Greg was watching the offense, and I was watching the offense along with Greg. So let's attack the defense first and let people know that this is, the account of Mike Giardi. This is what Mike saw, how he felt. And we'll begin with the pass rush, Greg. Mike saw a consistent pass rush, and not only was the pass rush consistent, he also saw lots of different guys getting home, so to speak.
Yeah, you aptly described the scenario. And yes, I am a little bit antisocial when it comes to watching training camp practices. I mean, everybody does it differently. Some people like to sit on the hill with other people and chit chat and compare notes and stuff like that. Like, I just like to be by myself so I don't like to be tainted by other people's opinions. Like, I want to just make my own opinions. And, it was really not about moving away from you. It was more trying to find a place where I could see both fields unobstructed, and also the best position for me to hold my binoculars and write notes at the same time. But we did compare and contrast a few times. Most of the, like you said, similarly, like, I focused on the offense. Like, I needed to see the offensive line and the quarterbacks and Drake Maye against the Eagles. Mike took the defense. Now, there were snaps where the Patriots offense was huddling up or whatnot, so we could look over at the other field in the team periods. And, I thought that the Patriots defense did really well, from what I saw. I mean, there was a touchdown to Saquon Barkley, who was, Matthew Judon had to cover him on a wheel route 40 yards down the field. I mean, that's not good for anybody. That's a win for the Eagles. They got the matchup they wanted, and, it happened. I did see Christian Gonzalez break up a pass to A.J. Brown, sort of like a short hitch in the flat. That was nice. I think it seemed like Gonzalez struggled a little bit in one-on-ones. Again, I'm not panicking about that because unless it's in the red zone, there's no help for the defense. I mean, it's all advantage for the offense. They know where they're going. They know how to set up guys. The quarterback doesn't have a pass rush. Like, eventually everybody's going to get open against anybody. So I'm not alarmed about that. But I did think in team periods, like, I probably saw more snaps of the defense in team red zone. And I thought they did really well. Saw the 2-minute period where they ended up stopping the Eagles at about, I want to say, like the 10 or 12 yard line. Yeah. Forced 4 and out at the end of it. And that's the first team Eagles. I will say what was significant for me was seeing the pass rush get home. And it was a variety of guys against an Eagles offensive line that we know is really good and one of the best. Now they're going through some transition. No more Jason Kelsey at center. They had Juergens at center. Mekhi Becton, the former Jet first round bust, so to speak. He was at right guard, and probably the largest right guard I've ever seen in my life.
That's why I'm laughing. I'm laughing because we're sitting there, and Greg shoots his head over at me quick and goes, "Nick." I look over, and Greg's like, "Yeah, they're playing Becton at right guard." I said, "Yeah, I read that last week." And then we're both looking at him, and he is just a freaking he's like 6'7", 400, whatever the hell he's a giant at guard, and it's like you're watching.
How do you even throw over him?
Yeah, I don't like it. Doesn't add up looking at it, but I was like, he is a large human being.
Yeah, and so and look, and this comes to mind because I was watching, I think it was BST last night, and they were making note that Gerard Mayo was with the offense, the Patriots offense, as opposed to the defense. And they thought that was significant. And maybe that had something to do with he wanted to see what Alex Van Pelt was up to. I don't read it that way at all. I mean, that could be the case, but I will say normally in these joint practices, what happens is you have a head coach on each field. And so it's very normal for Nick Sirianni to want to be with his offense because it's basically his offense. And so that Gerard Mayo was basically the head coach of the other field, the supervisor of the other field, I don't think had any significance at all. It could have, but in my experience, that didn't, mean anything. But I thought the Patriots defense did well. I do think that on both sides of the ball for the Eagles, there's some transition going on. Jalen Hurts did not have a good year last year. We all know what happened to the Eagles down the stretch. They completely fell apart. Yeah. They're going through a lot of growing pains. We know they have talent in a lot of different spots. Defensively, they were a train wreck last year to the point where they had to put Matt Patricia in to run somebody else's scheme, which went about as well as it sounds. It was a complete debacle. There was no way Matt Patricia was going to be back in Philly this year. They have Vic Fangio, who I love. I have a great deal of respect for one of the godfathers of defense in the NFL. And so they're working through some things. So it wasn't a talented Eagles team, no doubt. Howie Roseman does a good job in that regard. But in terms of where they are and how formidable they are, I wouldn't say this was a huge test, but it was a good individual test, I would say.
As far as the pass rush, I looked over, probably saw, I'd say my guess, anywhere between 10 and 15 snaps of the defense yesterday. Because, again, I was mostly focused on the offense like Greg was. I saw Tavai get home at one point. I saw Judon get home once or twice. So it did look like the pass rush was there. The other part of the defensive line that you already brought up was Devon Gottschall. And pretty much Gottschall ate against the Philadelphia offensive line and run game. It was kind of
did really well. Mm-hmm.
So that's good to see, right, Greg? I mean, with Barmore out especially, Gottschall, you need they're different players. And Gottschall's not the pass rush guy. He's not going to be, making plays on the quarterback too often. But to have Gottschall be that steady anchor, at least on early downs, is critical for this defense, correct?
Yeah, I thought especially Gottschall. We'll probably get into the Giants, the Panthers preseason game a little bit. I was a little concerned about the defensive interior. I think there's a bunch of places on this roster where the depth is razor thin, and I think that's one of the places. But for them to do what it appeared they did. Now, I did see the Eagles pop off on some runs. That's for sure. But considering how different that run defense is, and another thing I wanted to point out, and it's an interesting choice to me. Normally when we're in training camp, we see the defense and offense run off cards, which means they are, even for a preseason game, they prepare, at least in the past, watching Bill Belichick and all those guys. Yeah. They prepare for the upcoming opponent, which, gives you a look of their scheme and, some of the basic stuff that you're going to see. I haven't seen them work off of cards at all in this camp. And so I don't think they were really prepared for the Eagles. It's an interesting choice when you're talking about what's going on with the offense that they're not doing this.
Yeah, let me jump in for a second because it's the opportune time to do so. I saw something that jumped out at me, and I'm glad you brought this up because when Drake Maye was speaking to the media yesterday, I saw this on, I think it was Early Edition yesterday on NBC Sports Boston, and Drake said that they really hadn't prepared for Philadelphia, that they were going out there, feel their way through things. Then they were going to take the film and watch what happened at the joint practice and then prepare for the preseason game tomorrow night. And I found that fascinating that they pretty much went out there and said, let's just naturally let this thing develop and organically figure out what they're doing. I didn't know if that was a usual occurrence, but according to you, it is not, especially under Bill Belichick.
Yeah, that confirms what I believed and what I've seen. I mean, because I was even looking at sort of my practice report from camp, and I have this disclaimer with quarterback stats where I explain, and it's from years past because it's just, I copy and paste what I've done in years past, try to be consistent. And what I say is I'm not going to have the same number of plays or passes or attempts, quarterback stats, as other people because there are periods where the team works off of cards. Right. And I don't count that because, basically the defense isn't, really competing and, and so, but I haven't noticed any of that in camp. And that is certainly a decision. And, now that I think about it, with the struggles of the offense, could that have something to do with it? Hell yes. And I don't really understand that. I'm trying to remember what Mike McCarthy used to do because we know Van Pelt came from that. I seem to remember them working off cards a lot. Now they'll start to work off of cards for the regular season opener, but normally you try to, even Belichick mentioned this, I think when he was on the McAfee show this week, where, you do a little preparation for the preseason game just to give your guys a chance. And so, yeah, that was certainly another interesting choice by this coaching staff.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the quote, and I just can't find the quote. But I remember Drake Maye saying something along the lines of that they hadn't really prepared for what they were going to see yesterday because it stood out to me. And when you just mentioned the whole card thing, my mind, that the switch went off a little bit, and I said, oh, wait, the Drake Maye thing. It is a very interesting decision by that coaching staff. The last thing about the defense that I wanted to hit on, Giardi brought up the secondary depth being an issue, and I appreciate Mike. I'm not really worried about that right now because and Mike mentioned that there was no Marcus Jones, there was no Jonathan Jones. I don't know how many fourth or fifth corners are going to be capable of slowing down A.J. Brown and or Devontae Smith. So, relatively speaking, the fact that Marco Wilson and Alex Austin and Isaiah Bolden struggled against two of the best receivers in the game, to me it's like, yeah, expected. And if you go into a game against those guys, a game that actually counts, I would just have to imagine Gonzalez would be put on one of them. And yesterday it was mostly Smith in the 11-on-11, the team periods. And I would imagine that second corner would get some help on the back end. And I wonder, Greg, I don't know if you got to see it or not, but I do wonder, was this more of like a test these guys out thing? Because Gerard's talked about trying to find that corner behind Marcus and Jonathan, and they've brought up Marco Wilson. So maybe this was a sink or swim moment for those other cornerbacks, and they put him against A.J. Brown for the most part and said, all right, let's see how you do one-on-one against that beast.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think so. I mean, we're going to discuss a little bit more about their decisions as it relates to the secondary and pass rush. Some of the decisions by DeMarcus Covington later, but it seems like Jonathan Jones and Marcus Jones and even Shaun Wade are getting closer. They all retreated to the rehab field after stretching yesterday. Shaun Wade's definitely competing with, I think, Alex Austin and Marco Wilson. With those guys, Isaiah Bolden and Marcellus Dial. I think there's nothing wrong with putting these bubble guys in a position where they're a few slots up, but they're competing, and that's good tape and good evidence for the team when they get into final cutdowns. Hey everybody, it's Greg Bedard, and I wanted to tell you about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Do you think Tyreek Hill will get more than 90.5 yards in week 1? Aaron Jones runs for more than 66.5 yards? Cook up your hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks. I was going through the other day. They also have stat projections. So take a look at this. Patrick Mahomes for more than 4,300 passing yards. Of course he's going to do that as long as he stays healthy. And Aaron Rodgers for more than 3,750 passing yards. Download the Prize Pick app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, run your game.
So I was, to move along to the offense now, I was sitting at home last night in the living room, and I was perusing through YouTube, and I came across 98.5 The Sports Hub and a YouTube video post of one Greg Bedard. And, boy, you made Mike Felger happy yesterday. Whoa, boy. No, Felger doesn't get as excited. I don't know if you can get him to pitch a tent quicker in any other way than to go into that studio and just blister some of the stuff you saw like you did yesterday. The Felger was in heavy. He was laughing. He was the happiest I've ever seen him as you were just ripping apart the offense. You and I watched the offense yesterday. 30,000 feet. What we saw yesterday wasn't very good. But let's start with the offensive line. Just kind of your thoughts and get as minutiae as you want to about those guys up front.
Yeah, and at the top, let me say this, because I understand how things go on Felger and Maz, and of course my Twitter feed was filled with it over the last day, because I know my comments got a lot of run everywhere and probably scared the bejesus out of a lot of people. And what happens is I give my take, people hear the headlines, Mike regurgitates the headlines. When I'm done, normally, all the doomsday stuff, they run that back and they don't mention or highlight some of my other comments. And so let me just be clear, since Felger's not here to, mangle what I'm saying is, yes, yesterday was a train wreck for the offense. I left, it got worse as the practice went on. It was horrifying. It was some of the worst offense I've seen in any training camp. Right up there with some of the lowlights from the Matt Patricia years. I do think it's a little bit different. I think that the Patricia offense had some talent. Matt had no idea what he was doing. Now, I think that the coaches know what they're doing on this team. I think that the talent is a little bit limited. I do think that they, like we mentioned, like not preparing for the team, that's not going to help. It's going to look worse. I mean, it just is. And, Drake Maye does feel miles away for me in terms of where he is in this offense, how he looks, that sort of thing. That being said, okay, that is today. That is my opinion today after watching what we saw. Now, do I think that they are necessarily going to be a horrific offense and only win one game and Drake Maye is a bust? No, that's not what I'm saying at all. And yes, both can be true. I can give my opinion on what I saw yesterday and what I've seen in camp to this point. But you also have to remember it is now the middle of August. They're not playing basically until the middle of September. Yeah. There's like 3-4 weeks left, almost a month left for them to prepare for the opener. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of time, practice time that we're not going to see because we don't see them in practice after yesterday. The only thing that we're going to see is the last preseason game, and we don't know what we're going to see in that game. Did that practice have me questioning a lot of things about what's going on and some of the choices that they made? Yes. Do I think that they possibly misevaluated how far away Drake Maye was? Yes. But that doesn't mean that he's going to be a bust or anything like that. I've always been of the opinion, people can go back, the BSJ members can go back and read my Drake Maye pre-draft evaluation. And I read it on the air yesterday, and I basically said, he needs to sit for at least a year. And I'm fine with that. To me, it's all about the decisions made for 2025. Yeah, it might be rough this year in points, but as long as they improve at some point, like the middle of the season, they improve towards the end, and maybe we get to see a little bit of Drake Maye, and we say, holy cow, this guy looks completely different than what we saw in the middle of August. I'm all good. That means that the franchise is on the right track. But specific to the offensive line, yeah, what went on yesterday and how basically everybody got beat. And it was a combination of free rushers, guys just, getting beat one-on-one. The quarterbacks, especially Drake Maye, probably factoring into some of it, holding on to the ball, a little bit of indecision, not making the right checks at the line. It was very concerning. To me, it's the type of practice, and I heard from a couple coaches who heard me yesterday, and they were like, Greg, you're 100% correct. This is the type of practice where everyone goes back into the meeting room either yesterday or today, and they say, okay, how are we going forward? They need to reevaluate everything. Are they going to continue this Vidarian Lowe thing at left tackle? Do you think about giving a guy, here's a positive, Layden Robinson has had a hell of a couple weeks, including the preseason game, one-on-ones yesterday against the Eagles. He's done a really nice job. Do you give it a look? And it's probably too late for Thursday's game against the Eagles, but starting after that, do you give it a look where you kick Owenu out to right tackle, you put Layden Robinson in at right guard, and now you just have to worry about left tackle? And maybe you think about putting a core four back over there, who we know is at least a professional and has played in this league and at times played well. So, yeah, it was rough yesterday, but they got to figure that out because, talking about the offense, talking about Alex Van Pelt, talking about Drake Maye where he is, it doesn't mean crap if they can't block anything. And that includes the run game, which didn't look that great either yesterday.
Yeah, we'll get to the run game in a little bit. Just a few thoughts on the O-line. I like to differentiate the top O-line and the rest of the O-line. And I thought pre-Carolina preseason game, before we get to that game last Thursday night, the top offensive line did not look bad, at least to me. It didn't look like a fire drill. It didn't look like 2023. It looked like they had settled in somewhat. And were they going to be a great offensive line? No. But were they going to lose their ass? No. Top offensive line. Carolina game, a core four who missed a few practices goes out there, makes at least 2-3 mistakes, and is like,
that was just snaps. By the way, let me just say, I did not like that. He hadn't practiced for 3 days, and then you throw him in at game speed and full contact. That was just not a good decision.
Unfair to a core four. So took a little bit of a step back, and So had been the second best offensive lineman in camp behind Owenu. Yep. So took a slight step back against Carolina. So I just want to make this point because I haven't heard a lot of people make it. When you look at the totality of the camp, that top offensive line wasn't doing a bad job until Carolina. Then you had the Carolina game, and then you had the joint practice yesterday, which was abominable. And so now we look at it and we go, okay, how much has to change? You brought up the Owenu idea, sliding him out to right tackle. Would you entertain the idea, Greg, of giving Caden Wallace maybe a couple of reps on the left side? He was up and down early in camp, but would you go back to that and see if he could really give something more than Lowe, or are you just done with that idea and you'd rather mess with the right side and then maybe kick a core four to the left?
So what I would do if I was in charge is I would definitely either use practice or the remaining preseason games to take a look at Robinson at right guard and Owenu at right tackle. And then I would let Caden Wallace and Chukwuekwuor for battle it out for left tackle. Like let them compete. Flip series if you have to. Like, to me, Bedard Lowe and Calvin Anderson have been huge issues at offensive tackle. And, you're right. At times, like, they've shown really well. Bedard Lowe had some really rough film against the Panthers. The kind of stuff where, he looked really light. He looked about like 260 pounds. He's getting pushed around easily by, second string Carolina Panthers. And so I think they need to go back into the room. They need to discuss it, but they have to figure out, all right, well, what are we going to do at left tackle? To me, I think a core four and Wallace battling it out there would be the right thing to do. And then take a look at Robinson at right guard to see whether he can handle it. It's not, especially around here, it's not unusual for a middle to late offensive coordinator, late round offensive lineman to pop and play meaningful minutes to start for this team. I mean, look at Owenu. What was he, a 6th-round pick? And all of a sudden you were like, holy crap, they have something. Like, Robinson has made me, feel that way when I've watched him at times, especially the Panthers game. And I know internally they're high on him, and now it's time for the coaches to get on board.
Yeah, Shaq Mason would be another guy who was later rounds, offensive guard, who did a good job early in his career. All right, so I think the offensive line thing directly leads into the Drake Maye conversation. And I saw you yesterday. I don't necessarily agree with you saying that, and look, you have watched a lot more practices than I have. And I'm sure there are little things you're picking up about Maye that I don't pick up. But my number one takeaway from yesterday, when I walked out of that practice, and I said this to you, I think, at the time, I have no clue where Drake Maye is. I don't know if he's far behind. I don't know if he's behind. I don't know if he might be on schedule. And I'm not saying that to defend or excuse Drake Maye. It's just this offensive line, especially yesterday, was so bad that the last two 11-on-11 periods were absolutely useless, Greg. 6 of the 12 snaps were quote-unquote sacks. A bad snap from Mafe. And another snap, another play that ended up with a pocket that started to collapse around Maye, and I think Maye just threw the football away because he saw the soldiers charging after him. It's like going to the ER. I said this to Kelly last night. When you go to the ER, say you have multiple injuries, the ER nurse, the ER doctor is going to tend to what needs to be tended to first. They want to take care of the immediate threat to your life, right? To me, yesterday, the immediate threat was not Drake Maye, not even close. The immediate threat that needed to be taken care of was the offensive line. That was where the triage had to be focused on. And so it's very difficult for me to draw any grand conclusion about where Drake Maye is when the offensive line is so bad, and some of the operation is certainly on him, but the snaps are not consistent, especially when you have Mafe out there. It's just very difficult for me to know where he is, given the bleep show that was in front of him yesterday, and it has been in front of him for, I would say, most of camp.
I don't disagree with that. 2 points that I wanted to make. First, you mentioned Mafe, and it triggered something in my mind. And let me preface this sort of like the tool bag question about Matthew Judon yesterday. I love David Andrews. I think I'm one of his biggest fans. I think he's completely underrated by not only nationally, but this fan base. And I knew he's been through some things personally in the last couple of weeks with his child. And I obviously have totally understand that. I am going to be a little critical of, and I don't know what's going on. I don't know if he has an injury, which makes this valid. But David Andrews in the last week has checked out of some team periods, like sat out. Okay.
Yep.
Including yesterday, there was a team period against the Eagles where he sat out. That means that Nick Leverett is now the starting center. And that means Antonio Mafe and or Liam Fornadell, another guy who I will say as a positive has had a really good couple of weeks. He reminds me of Dan Connolly, probably because he's wearing 63 out there. Dan was one of my favorite players to cover. But he when he's gotten a chance at center and at guard, he's done a really nice job the past couple of weeks. And so I don't know why they keep putting Mafe out there. But my point in saying this is when David chooses not to practice, and I wonder if this is one of the, again, I'm not saying this because he could have an injury. I don't know. And he could have some issues where, he can't go the full practice and he's a veteran and that's fine. I understand. But is this an example of Mayo being a little bit looser with the players being like, hey, especially the veterans, captains, like, hey, if you need to duck out of practice or you need to take a series off, that's fine. I get it. But the downside of that is like David not being on the field has a trickle down effect that affects Drake Maye and a bunch of other people. Yep. And like, I just don't, it's just not, to me, it's just not good for Drake Maye. And, I think Mayo needs to figure out what's going on there and is be like, David, we need you out there, at least with the starters, because Leverett's fine for Maye, but once we get away from that, it's a train wreck. So, but I agree with you in terms of Drake Maye. I can't tell where he is. I can't, not, with the offensive line. Now, that being said, because I agree with your point, that being said, in my experience covering the National Football League, the decisions that coaches make in practice, there's a reason for it. Why aren't they giving him some snaps with the starting offensive line? Is that just something they believe in? Or in my experience, it's he's not ready for that. And what's the truth? I don't know. And all I can go on, Mayo, every time he's asked about Drake Maye and not getting snaps with so-and-so and this, he's like, when he's ready, he'll get that. To me, that means he's not ready. And so all I can do is take that and put it together with what I'm seeing at practice and come to the conclusion that he is miles away from starting a game in the National Football League.
It's the middle of the summer. It's hot. But you know what summer means to me? Baseball. I love going to the park. I love supporting the Old Town team. And when I want to go see my favorite team, Game Time is the perfect place to go. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying baseball tickets. I was just looking at the website, gametime.co. They also have the app, Game Time. I was looking, big event coming up, a New York team coming to Boston, red hot, hometown team. I got to tell you, the prices are a bit pricey for the first game of the series, but guess what? On Game Time, they have these things called flash deals. So an outfield grandstand ticket that normally costs $152, it's $132, $20 off. That'll get you in the park. That'll get you a good view. nobody in front of you, no poles in front of you. That's the kind of stuff you find when you go over to Game Time. You know what I also love about Game Time? Well, there's a few things, okay? I love seeing the view from your seat on my phone before you buy. That's a must. I won't buy tickets from any place unless it has that. Game Time has it. Also, the all-in pricing shows your total cost up front. You know, you go to these other sites and you're like, oh, that's a good deal. Suddenly you get to the end and there's all these fees and taxes and other things, and all of a sudden you're paying double than what you thought. That does not happen at Game Time. So make sure you get over there. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
A couple things about that, though, about the idea of Maye not playing behind the top offensive line, at least for a series or two. I just want to talk about the plan, and I want to pick apart your brain about what we've seen play out here. Against Carolina in that preseason game, I understood the idea of not putting Maye behind the second-team offensive line because the bullets were flying and you might be a little concerned how it would impact the rookie quarterback. I said this on Saturday on 98.5, Greg, during the shift I did. If I'm Mayo, I'm Alex Van Pelt, and I'm going into that game, I would rather have Drake Maye start that game against Carolina and get both series with the top offensive line and your top skill position players than playing Jacoby Brissett a handful of snaps, because we know who Jacoby Brissett is. We understand who he is as an NFL quarterback. I don't think 5 to 6 or 7 snaps in a preseason game is going to impact Jacoby Brissett that much, especially when he's going to get a lot of snaps against Philly at the joint practice and might end up getting more snaps tomorrow night in the preseason game. So I didn't have much of an issue with Maye, behind that first offensive line and not wanting to put him behind the second offensive line. I just would have started him and sat Brissett last Thursday night. And then we got into yesterday. And here's my thing. It's like almost like the chicken or the egg. Is Drake Maye not ready because Drake Maye is not ready? Or is Drake Maye not ready because you are putting obstacles in front of his development because of how you're handling him and what you're doing? And I just have to go back. And yesterday I got to the point of just utter frustration, because if he's not good enough to be behind the top offensive line, then he shouldn't have gotten that series against Carolina to begin with. And then people would say, well, then you don't play him. Well, you got to play him at some point. You got to try to develop the young man at some point. So if he's good enough to play against Carolina with that top offensive line, I don't know how he's not good enough to get at least one series with the top O-line yesterday. I'm not saying for him to split reps with Brissett. I think it's clear that Brissett is QB1 right now. But I also think, what are you getting out of Drake Maye? Like, when you watch yesterday play out, literally, his last 12 snaps of that practice were useless. The young man is not getting anything out of that. And it's like, okay, so he might be a little bit behind in some cases, but how are you improving him? How is he progressing when he's stuck in the situation that we saw yesterday, when it's just, you might as well just sit him down? I'd rather have Bailey Zappi out there running around like a chicken with his head cut off than putting Maye back there for 12 snaps of just useless football. So I don't really understand the plan. I don't, and this might change tomorrow night. He might go out there and play a whole quarter behind the top offensive line. And if that's the case, then I'll say, okay, it makes a little bit more sense. But I don't know how we've gone through so much of camp. And to me, and you just agreed, we don't really know where the development is of Drake Maye. And it should not be that way in the middle of August. We should have at least some idea as to how this guy is progressing and if he is progressing. Yeah.
I completely agree. And, this whole Drake Maye situation, and I don't want to, this will probably be a whole nother podcast, probably next week. Cause I think I'm going to write this for next week. Hopefully somebody doesn't steal it before I get to it. But so I've been thinking about, like, what would Bill Belichick, what would Josh McDaniels do with this type of player? Somebody who is not just, let's just throw the third overall pick out of it. Let's just talk about like a quarterback who is developmental, who has talent. And, at first I was thinking, I was like, well, if they drafted Lamar Jackson that year, what would they have done? But then, texting with people, I was like the example just came to mind. It's Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo, first of all, was a second round pick, 62nd overall. We understand what the situation was. They were grooming him to be the successor to Brady in, however many years. He ideally he would have been the backup in 2014 as a rookie. That ended up happening. And Jimmy Garoppolo he came from a similar offense to Drake Maye. A lot of shotgun, a lot of spread, never called his own plays, like all that stuff. And, we'll get into this later, but like in terms of how the Patriots developed him, I mean, he played in the preseason, his rookie year, he played 27 snaps, 30 snaps, 24, and 69 in the Giants. So it's different. They had the fourth preseason game. He played the entire game against the Giants. And, even if the kid's talented and unrefined and and this is the stuff that they were doing with Jimmy, his footwork and things like that, they played him and, what they would do was just basically take what he was good at, call that stuff, and then, slowly expand what they were doing with him. I don't understand how you can't do that with Drake Maye.
It just pisses me off because so far the two most crucial moments in this camp season right now is last Thursday night when he gets a series in the rain and then you take him out, and then the joint practice. And what did you get out of that? You didn't get anything really out of either of those moments. And now you're looking at the second preseason game tomorrow night. We'll see how it goes. But the third preseason game is also going to be useless. Like, you might be looking at this camp and preseason and say to yourself, Drake Maye got one series against a starting defense. How the hell do you know what he is? What he got one series with the starting offensive line and some of the starting weapons. Like, how do you know what you have? The virtual reality shit I get. Like, okay. But at some point, you got to put him on the football field and say, hey, live bullets, let's give him a chance with an offensive line that could somewhat block and see if the young man can make some plays. So it's just very frustrating. Just quick to...
By the way, real quick, Nick, did you see the breaking news that J.J. McCarthy is out for the season?
Yes, I was just going to mention that. Meniscus tear, he's done.
That's interesting. Kind of robs us a little compare and contrast, but, now... Basically, both quarterbacks which were probably it was probably between those two guys. The Patriots could have gone both routes, which is draft Drake Maye at 3 or trade down and draft J.J. McCarthy. And now both of them are in essence redshirting for a year. So I don't know. It's just interesting.
Just two quick questions I have for you, and then we'll move on. We got to run through it somewhat quickly because we're going to go long here today. I'm sure people don't mind, but the run game, you mentioned it much earlier. For the most part, it was a disaster. I thought Ramondre Stevenson had a pretty good day yesterday, given the circumstances. He popped one run that I thought he might have been able to take to the house. He had another couple of runs that were good gains. But other than that, Greg, a lot of run stuffs and a lot of minimal gains for that run game. And we've heard Alex Van Pelt say, and Mayo and players, this is a running team. They better block it better up front, my friend.
Yeah. And I wonder if they make some choices because of that. And you're right. I mean, this offense doesn't really work if you can't run the ball. And they haven't been able to run the ball. I think they've struggled some on their outside zone stuff. It's been interesting the past week or so in practice and even in the game. We've seen a lot more inside zone and also some, gap scheme. And I wonder if they're coming to the realization that fits what they're working with on the offensive line better, because I do think that stuff's been more effective. And now how does that trickle down and affect the passing game and what Alex Van Pelt wants to do? It's Nick, it's a mess.
The last thing I want to get to on the offense before we get to the Panthers preseason game and then some expectations for the Eagles tomorrow night. Wide receiver. This is something else that's starting to become a hair across my tuk-tuk. So, I don't know if you agree, but Jalen Polk, to me, from what I've seen, is the second best receiver in camp behind Pop Douglas.
Yep.
And I just wonder, when are they going to pull the trigger and actually put Polk out there as a consistent part of this starting offense? We've seen, yesterday or on Monday, I saw Andrew Callahan tweet that it seemed like there was a kind of a clear-cut hierarchy at wide receiver in that room, and it was Osborne, Thornton, and I think it was Pop or whatever. Is it time to start sprinkling in Polk more, or just say, hey, look, Tyquan, he did nothing yesterday. The only time I saw him was a drop. Hit him right in the hands. Enough is enough with the BS. Let's play Jalen Polk a little bit more. Is it time? It's time for me. Is it time for you?
Yeah, it's I think they're going to start doing that pretty soon. I mean, Tyquan Thornton has been a good story for much of camp. That he's still on the field at this point is an accomplishment in itself. I think he's just going to be a designated home run hitter. And speaking of that, talking to a coach the other day, they were like, look, figure out what Drake Maye did well in college. If it's, roll right, throw a deep bomb 60 yards down the left sideline, well, put Tyquan Thornton out there, let him run, and then just tell Drake to throw it. But anyways, yes, I agree. I think it when we get going, it's going to be Pop Douglas. It's going to be Jalen Polk. It's going to be KJ Osborne, and Javon Baker will get into the mix a little bit. But yeah, I mean, Tyquan Thornton goes over the middle yesterday and it's in traffic, predictably drop. Like, that's not his bag. He's an, perimeter guy. Just let him run down the field, maybe a slant, maybe an in-cut type of thing, but not over the middle. And Polk's a baller. I think it's coming sooner rather than later.
I hope to hell so. All right, Panthers preseason game last Thursday night. We'll just do kind of a 3 up, 3 down, 3 things you liked, 3 things you didn't like.
Yep.
3 things that you liked, Greg.
Layden Robinson, talked about it earlier. He's had a really good couple weeks. I want to see more out of him. I really like the size and physicality he plays with, so that's good stuff. Joe Milton was number 2. I think that's pretty obvious. No, I don't think he's any threat of anything. And do I think, and I was thinking about this the other day, do I think there's a chance, we get to the end of the season and maybe Drake Maye's not ready and say Jacoby Brissett's hurt and veteran de jure is hurt, and do they put Joe Milton out there running a package before Drake Maye? I could see it, just to take the bullets depending on what things are going on. But he did a nice job the other night. And the pass rush from Jeremiah Farms and Oshane Ximines. Is that how you pronounce it? You were on me about what is it?
Oshane Ximines.
Oshane Ximines. I'm going to get this probably in time for him to be released. But I thought they were really good with the pass rush. Run defense, not so good. Oshane was like all over the place. Bill would have probably cut him by now. The amount of times he was like peeking inside and running inside and giving up the edge. So yeah.
Yeah, Ximines, run defense, not his cup of tea, let's say.
No.
He did not show that ability with the Giants. He was not really asked to do that at ODU, from what I remember. It was pin your ears back and get after the quarterback, and he can do that. He can give you some pass rush. He had a nice special team stick in that preseason game, had a strip sack. I think he's got a chance to make this roster. Uche hurts his chance to make the roster, though, because Uche is a very similar kind of player, right? Like the sub-pass rush type. Farms, another guy. I agree with you. Farms showed up. And Jalen Polk, I just mentioned him, but he had that stick-em hands kind of catch near the sideline where he just plucked it out of the air. He looks like he belongs. All right, 3 things you didn't like.
Drake Maye's usage. I think people have heard me, whether they listen to me on 98.5 after the game. I pretty much immediately said it. I've written it. It makes 0 sense what they did with Drake Maye. There's plenty of ways to, get him used to game action while minimizing any injury risk or whatever risk. Like I said, find out what he's good at, find out what he has in his bucket, and run those plays at the minimum. And just do that and just do it over and over again. It's a preseason game against a team playing 4 and 2 shell, and it's a bunch of backups. Like, if you're not going to play him a lot, like, he could have played like the second and third quarters against the Panthers. If you're not going to play him against that team, like, what the hell are you going to do against the Eagles? Which we will get into in a second. I also didn't like, from a what the hell is this coaching staff doing department, why the Patriots blitzed so much in that game. The Patriots blitz percentage was the highest in the league in week 1 of preseason. I don't understand the point of that. I don't think you're learning anything about your pass rushers, and I certainly don't think you're learning anything about your cornerbacks and safeties, who basically had no work to do because Jake Plummer was under assault. All 5 of the Patriots sacks came on blitzes. Like, I could see if you're working with your top unit, even though you don't want to show much with your blitzes like during the preseason, but I just don't understand DeMarcus Covington making that choice. It was just like they were bullying a weaker kid. I just don't understand the point of that. And then some of the interior run defense. I mean, basically, once they get beyond Devon Godchow, and Sam Roberts does a decent job. He's been around here. He's got long arms. Like, you get beyond those 2 guys, man, whether it's Farms or Rekawale, he did have a nice run stuff. He penetrated a gap, got in the backfield, but those guys have a really tough time holding up to double teams on the interior, and that's a big worry of mine with this defense so far.
Everybody pump the brakes, relax. I'm not telling you that Gerard Mayo is going to fail as a head coach. I thought he had a rough first half. First time as a head coach out there, I thought he had a rough first half. You mentioned the Drake Maye usage thing. I know people will say Alex Van Pelt's the head coach of the offense, blah, blah, blah. Ultimately, the head coach, you got to figure it out with your young guy. Then you had the play with Wilcox, the non-catch. They didn't get to the line of scrimmage quick enough and snap the football. That allowed Carolina to challenge it. You lose possession because of that. That's a rookie mistake. The end of half scenario, you had 2 timeouts. Carolina had a 3rd down at their own 11-yard line. Why not call a timeout and force Carolina's hand to play that 3rd down the way your defense is playing? And maybe that gets you an opportunity to put Drake Maye out there at the end of the half for a quick 2-minute drill to see if he can actually do better with the live action. So it was a wasted opportunity at the end of the first half by Mayo. So I thought he had a rough first half. Chooks, City So, we mentioned him earlier. Chooks, somewhat understandable because of his situation coming off injury. So took a step back. And I don't mean to kill this guy, but Mitchell Wilcox, woof. Captain drop a lot. This dude drops at least every other football thrown to him. We saw it in camp. It happened in the game. He had a holding penalty. I want to see more LaMichael Petway and Jaheim Bell. I know what Wilcox is. He's not very good. So can we see some of the other tight ends on this roster and see if they can do anything? I don't get the Mitchell Wilcox stuff outside of, he might be able to block. Great. Does that mean he can block without holding? Because we didn't see it the other night. Before we get to the Eagles game and Greg's expectations, don't forget, take the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use that code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Also, check out BSJ, $50 for the year. They do great work. And finally, download the Prize Picks app today. Use that same code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, tomorrow night, Eagles preseason game. Of course, usually you have 2 joint practices. They only had 1 joint practice. Do you think that means, Greg, that we will see more of the ones tomorrow night than we would have anticipated under the usual 2 joint practice than preseason game?
Not necessarily, because there's still just 1 day of rest between the game and the practice. But the Patriots have a lot of work to do. I mean, at a minimum, I would expect to see Jacoby Brissett start the game and go through a series with the starting offensive line. And then most of the starting offensive line stays in. perhaps with the exception of David Andrews and Nick Leverett comes in, and then Drake Maye comes in and runs probably 2 series with the starting offensive line, and then get him out of there and let Zappe and Milton handle the rest. I would really like to see Brissett for a series and Drake Maye play the rest of the first half. Like, figure it out. Like, script it however you need. He needs to play, and I'll be very curious to see what they ask Drake Maye to do in the game, because I think this is another way where the coaches are telling you where he is, and we'll get a better idea.
Yeah, give me 2 or 3 series with the top offensive line and Drake Maye, and give him Jalen Polk, and let's see what it looks like. Enough is enough with this fakakta plan. I'm done with it. I'm moving forward without it. If I'm Gerard Mayo and company, you got to get the young man out there, and you got to get him reasonable time. And I'm concerned if you don't do that tomorrow night. Again, preseason game 3 is going to be pretty much a write-off. So you better get it done tomorrow night. If you don't, there's going to be some furniture moving around this house tomorrow night. You're not going to be good. He's Greg. I'm Nick. This went long. Hopefully you enjoyed. We'll be back after the preseason game at some point if Greg Bedard can figure out the schedule. He's a very busy man. But enjoy the game tomorrow night, and hopefully things look better than they did yesterday.